Thank you. I'm happy to be here and look back to this project, which seems to be very historical today compared to the other researches we heard about. It seems like one of the predecessors of exhibition history researches in the Central East European region. We started this project at Transit HU in 2009 together with Zsuzsa, and it was one of our first research projects, which led to other researches during the last 1.5 decades. Our aim with this project was to study innovative artistic activities that redefined the concept of the exhibition and its political potential in the 1960s and 70s. At the same time, our aim was also to study the exhibition as a distinct cultural phenomenon and genre during the state socialist period in the Central and Eastern European region. I'm going to lead you briefly through the concept of the project and its main phases in the form of exhibitions and an online archive of chronologies, which you see here on the slide. Yes, this is the starting page of the website now, which received a new design in the COVID year 2020-21. Yeah, you can go on. We aim to break with the practice of either ignoring or exoticizing this field, the history of exhibitions, and wanted to highlight the multi-layered connections between professional relations, exhibitions, events, and site of arts, rather than simply exhibit works of art from the period. We use chronologies as starting points to collect and study relevant exhibitions, as they play a crucial role in making seemingly marginal events part of historical narratives and canons. This is particularly true of those events in Eastern European art scenes that took place in the so-called second public sphere in the 1960s and 70s, as well as in the grey zones of state-run institutions, cultural houses, university clubs, or other haphazard venues. We wanted to know what forms of publicity were granted to the progressive artistic expressions by the political and social conditions of the period, and how these were connected to international processes and trends. For the first Parallel Chronologies exhibition in 2009, we aimed to collect and compare all chronologies ever published in Hungary of the art events in the period. The main principle for selecting relevant events was to see what made certain events important in their own time and made them become the subject of anecdotes and legends, while others were forgotten or only became significant later. I'm showing Dóra Maurer's illustrated chronology of the Hungarian avant-garde compiled for the catalogue of the 1980 exhibition Künstler aus Ungarn in Wilhelmshaven, which served as the basis of most of the published chronologies of the period. Maurer followed and recorded the events as a contemporary, and as it was common at the time, she as an artist also undertook the role of an art historian. The first public phase of the research was presented in the form of an international symposium and a documentary exhibition, The Invisible History of Exhibitions, which is also an interesting title, looking back from today, in Budapest in 2009, itself a result of an international collaboration with Serbian, Croatian, and Polish partners. Already here, the comparative approach became an important consideration. The exhibition featured 2 archives from the region dedicated to the neo-avant-garde period. The Prelom Collective collected some important events of the SZKC, the Students' Cultural Center in Belgrade, while the Kuda.org Media Center collected the most important documents of the neo-avant-garde in Novi Sad. The third part of the exhibition presented a possible chronology of progressive events in Hungary. We selected 10 events, starting with 1966, the first Hungarian happening by Tamás Szentjobb and Gábor Artolari, which took place in a cellar, and ending the chronology of events with 1977, the nude exhibition at the Club of Young Artists by Orsi Dostik. The mainly original documents came from Artpool and the personal archives of artists and art historians, and were documents, photos, and videos. The project was shown in 2 further exhibitions, at the Badischer Kunstverein in 2010 in Karlsruhe, where we invited artist Tamás Kaszás to do a display, which helped us to arrange the documents in a more structured way, but at the same time showed the working process character of the presentation. I think also the next slide shows it, yes. And later, we continued the research in international collaboration. Between 2010 and 12, we collaborated with the three Baltic countries and the Polish institution, and made a common presentation in the Riga art space, where we again exhibited the Hungarian documents together with the other countries' documents. And here we chose the format of presenting our chronology as posters, which then were reassembled as a newspaper. So this time we already published our chronologies as a publication, and also the text we wrote to it. The online archive was launched in 2012 and has been continuously expanded since then. This was the first design. It currently contains 13 chronologies, which were compiled by curators working on the history of the ex-Yugoslav, Polish, Hungarian, Czech, Slovak, Romanian, and various former Soviet art scenes. We asked the invited authors to compile a list of events focusing on a topic or period which is relevant from the point of view of their research, and we asked them to write a guide through this virtual exhibition which connects the events and explains their context. It's actually Zsuzsa who is the editor of this enthusiastic and enduring editor of this archive since 10 years. The 102 events, what is the next slide? Oh, okay. Maybe you can go to the current, yes. The 102 entries uploaded so far can be sorted and browsed by author, date, location, and participants. The authors and editors assign thematic keywords to the entries, which not only relate the events to art historical concepts, but also explicitly seek to apply the criteria of exhibition history as a discipline on its own right. And now we can go back to 2 more examples where we also, after the archive was started, we still play with it or exhibit it also as part of exhibitions. This was the example when the Transit.org collective organized the institutional presentation at the new museum, where also our archives and researches were presented. Here we exhibited a narrated video, and the last exhibition was here in Prague, when we were the Imagining Conceptual Art exhibition, where we were looking at the internationality of conceptual art, building on the result of research into the exhibition history. And it was actually on this occasion that Pavlina Morganova compiled the Czech chronology, which you can see there. And to conclude my part, it is an important learning from this project that the different cultural contexts which are part of the archive have to be considered in their own time frames as histories. So the invitation that everybody compiles a chronology as we imagined must be differentiated. And the differences between the present national borders and the cultural map of the period under study, which is the end of the Second World War and the regime changes of the 1980s and 90s, requires interpretation. On the one hand, the socialist states of the period limited the autonomy of many national and ethnic cultural identities, and the cultural hegemonies thus established a need to be revised retrospectively. And often the struggle for the autonomy and the legitimacy of the art scene to be presented is still ongoing. And Zsuzsa will show you some.
Yes. As we publish more and more chronologies, the need to find connections between them emerged, especially because we had to realize that the mission to cover the whole region with parallel chronologies requires much greater capacities than what we had. So the additive method had to be rethought. In addition to keywords assigned to each event, the opportunity to present the project at an exhibition in Transit SK in Bratislava provided an occasion to identify structural connections between parallel chronologies. The exhibition Sitting Together explored 3 themes: international artist meetings, attempts at self-historicization, and the especially East European connections between neo-avant-garde artists and popular as well as art education. Since the online archive was built on predefined structure, the systematic dissimilarities and asynchronities between different East European art scenes also posed a challenge. For instance, the Polish and the GDR case, however different their cultural and political premises were, the history of small artisan galleries in different cities seemed to have a specific importance difficult to tease apart into chronologies. While the events documented in the archive were dominantly realized outside or on the margins of the so-called official art scenes, it was clear that the elasticity and coordinates between these spheres were contingent on different circumstances at different times and places. Parallel cultures emerged in the dialogical relationships with the mainstream, and failing to understand the modus operandi of the state-governed sphere would severely narrow the interpretation field of the other side. During the more than 10 years running this project, we had to find ways to accommodate different answers to such dilemmas. I put on the slide. Main narrative focus on the description of adventurous maneuvers to outwit repressive authorities instead of the evaluation of the very artistic propositions. Or compiling a chronology, do we also make value judgments and participate in the process of canonization? Or does it affect the relevance of an event for an exhibition, for exhibition histories if it presented progressive or mediocre art? It was a crucial principle from the beginning to look at art events from more angles, a horizontal, synchronous one, reconstructing the complex moment of their realization, and from a longitudinal axis, placing them within a chain of events, causes, and effects, and processes of historicization. Tracing the origins and afterlife of underground events, we learned that often within some years or a decade, or when translocated to another city or country, the very same artistic practices could travel back and forth between the first and second public sphere. As it was already revealed by Mahuela Neshlahova and following her, among others, Piotr Piotrowski, the early 60s exhibitions titled Confrontations in Prague, Warsaw, and Bratislava, with some not yet researched embranchments to Budapest artists and events, show remarkable coalescences between national and local event histories. The first events of this series are part of Pavlina Morganova's chronology. Organized first in an attic room and then in a basement studio in Prague in the spring and autumn of 1960, the scarcely documented exhibitions brought together the then young representatives of the Czech informal. In the meanwhile, on the occasion of AIKA Congress in Warsaw, an exhibition titled the same in Polish opened in Galeria Krzywie Kolo in Warsaw to present parallel tendencies of Polish post-war modernism, but in this case providing them with international publicity. The Czech artist Eduard Ovčáček, who studied in Bratislava, visited the Prague confrontations and also got in contact with the leader of Krzywie Kolo, Marian Bogus, and initiated yearly confrontation exhibitions in Bratislava between 1971 and 1961 and 64, first in studios, then in marginal but public galleries. These survived not only local informal, but structural abstraction and early versions of pop art. In the following years, Krzywie Kolo organized a series of international exhibitions titled Argumenti, which also involved Czech and Slovak artists, as well as the Hungarian abstract painter and sculptor, former member of the post-war European school, Tihomir Gyarmati. The local network formed through these events and the plenaires, also organized by Bogus and in Osieki and Elblag, resulted in several smaller case exhibitionary exchanges in Czechoslovakia, Budapest, and in more cities in Poland in the first half of the 1960s. The chronologies of art events in Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary did not include this cross-border revival of post-war modernism in their scope, since they rather focused on the evolution of neo-avant-garde exhibition that brought a radical turn in exhibition making and curating. However, in the Czech case, there's a unique link between the two threads of history, since Vladimir Budnik, a protagonist of confrontations exhibitions, was a forerunner of street actions and happenings. Lajos Kassák, an internationally renowned member of pre-war avant-garde, was also rediscovered by this post-war regional network, and thus during the 50s and 60s he participated in more distinguished exhibitions abroad, including Elblag in Poland, as well as Bratislava and Prague, then in Hungary, where he was only canonized as a writer. We included in our chronology his last retrospective in his lifetime as an emblematic example of the peculiar institution of self-financed exhibitions. The cultural policymakers, in the spirit of liberalization, connected to new economic mechanism, aside a small informed first floor gallery space, Adolf Fényes Hall, to all those exhibitions that did not seem worthy enough for state support but could still be tolerated. To pay for his own exhibition was a humiliating experience for Kassák. On the other hand, thousands went to see his works, and his exhibition made the venue popular among the so-called iparterv artists, most of whom had two-person exhibitions there from the late 60s. In the joint exhibition of István Nadler and György Jovanovics in 70, Jovanovics' environment reflected on the distinctive shape of the hall. It was coupled with an action for the opening, a recording of a half-actual, half-augmented daily news was played, in which the official radio announcers give a painstakingly detailed account of the works on view, as if the exhibition happened in a much more prominent institution. 15 years later, János Sugár, a former member of Indigo Group, when he got the opportunity to make a film at Béla Balázs studio, borrowed the hall as a venue for shooting, only to use this occasion for installing his fictitious exhibition there, which, according to the concept of the film, was a kind of time capsule message for the future. The comparative study of neo-avant-garde art events brought the embarrassing realization that women artists and curators were often more supported by state-organized contexts than in the circles of parallel culture. In this respect, transnational events played a crucial role in facilitating more reflected cultural curatorial policies. Here I just want to show an intriguing crosstalk between events in Gdansk, Toronto, Budapest, and Belgrade. As it was discussed in the previous Budapest chapter of Resonances by Margarota Michniakevich, Anna Kutera's 75 Prezentácia was a performance with the participation of 5 male artists who were called to the stage to sit next to the artist for a few minutes. The event was featured by Eva Tatar's chronology, focusing on events organized by women artists in Poland. The event was part of the Dance Student Festival, which, similarly as planners, was organized in the spirit of socialist internationalism, but also allowed young art students to invite progressive artists from all over the world. Thus, among Kutera's fellow students and artists from Wroclaw, Nils Lomholt from Denmark, Goran Tribujak from Zagreb, were also Kutera's partners in the performance, in addition to a not yet identified artist from Prague and Budapest. Kutera was member of the group around Recent Art Gallery in Wroclaw and the contextual art movement around Jan Świdwinski, both dominated by male artists. Her performance was much appreciated by the foreign guests. Thus, she and Świdwinski received a chain of invitations. To cut it short, 1 year later, Kutera found herself discussing anti-capitalist contextual art and the position of women artists in socialist countries in Toronto with Sarah Chasvers and Joseph Kossuth from New York Fox magazine and other local socialist, Marxists, and feminists. The latter were skeptical about the achievement of the institutionalized women's movement, but Kutera claimed proudly that she did not experience any repression in Poland. At the same time, learning about different views and tendencies of feminism changed her perspective too. The 78th conference, Comrade Women, organized by Belgrade Student Center and discussed by Jelena Vesic's chronology, could also facilitate a mutual critical dialogue between socialist women's movement and Western feminist activism. The conference was accompanied by exhibitions and film screenings and was attended by guests from both sides of the Iron Curtain. One of the accompanying exhibitions, a participatory project by Gorenka Matic and Nabojša Čankarović, consisted of photos of women, including themselves and the conference organizers, displayed along their answers to questions, exposing gaps between women's desires and actual possibilities in a society where they were nominally regarded equal. New wave feminism was reflected only a few events in Hungary, art events, from the second half of the 70s. We included one such example in our chronology, Orsi Drozdik's 77 nude model. It was a performance exhibition criticizing the gendered assumptions of subject-object relations in academic art education. The exhibition at the Young Artists Club comprised a space where entry was prevented by a rope barrier, sometimes by a gauze curtain, with the artist inside drawing another woman. Similarly, as Kutera, Drozdik took the lead and invited 5 male artists and the art historian László to open her exhibition day by day and to endure to be utilized in a situation cooked up by a woman. Throughout the project, we wanted to emphasize that exhibitions are collective endeavors, contingent on various power relations, kind of compromises between all actors involved, but also have a strong critical potential. The chronology of Ivana Bago focused on the critique of exhibition understood as a spectacle, which was most robust in the case of Želimir Koščević, the director of Zagreb Student Gallery, when he exhibited the male art section of the 71 Prague Biennial as an unopened parcel. Dialectics of hiding gained new implications in the 1980 event Shroud by Mamu Group in the chronology offered by Alina Sherban. The group of artists active in Tegru Mures, members of Hungarian minority there, created a performative environment that covered but also connected the participants. It could be interpreted as a reflection on their underground status or a means to eliminate the visibility and bodily presence of the participants, but also as a gesture to form a community and to materialize the empty, invisible space between the particles of an art event. And instead of conclusion, I just would like to show some remarkably similar parallels which happened in Budapest and in Warsaw as a possible way to find connections between various art events of the region. So thanks a lot.